Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's story. We're so glad to have you here. We hope that this story will bring you moments of reflection, warmth, and inspiration. Thank you for joining us now. Let's dive into the story and discover the beautiful bond that waits ahead. Under the scorching sunlight of the dry season, the ancient South African forest appeared like a desolate painting, cracked, exhausted, and withering away. The once babbling streams that flowed around the bushes now held only pebbles and patches of cracked, dry mud. Leaves blanketed the ground. The soil lay bare and silent, as if groaning from thirst. There were no longer the cheerful morning calls of gibbons, nor the familiar hoofprints of antelopes bounding across the grasslands. Life itself seemed to be retreating from this parched land. Amid this desolation, old Ranger Tauhi's silver hair tousled by the wind, his sleeves frayed from decades under the sun, continued his patient steps past each lifeless tree trunk, his keen eyes scanning for even the slightest sign of disturbance. After more than 40 years devoted to these woods, he understood every rustle of the wind, every hidden trail, even the strange weight of silence. And this morning, that silence felt unusually ominous. On the scorched earth, amid the brittle dry grass cracking underfoot, he suddenly halted, a long smeared trail of fresh blood, dark red and still wet, cut across the narrow path. Beside it, deep gouges in the soil, as if giant claws had desperately raked the ground. He bent down, gently placing his hand over the marks, the soil still warm, the blood still thin. His heart quickened, a ranger's instinct telling him that a life nearby was in grave danger. A dry wind tore through the forest, carrying the strange, metallic scent of blood of a wound not yet healed. Tao stood up, his eyes following the large, chaotic footprints pressed into the earth. They weren't the calculated steps of a predator. They were the frantic tracks of something fleeing, or worsening. And in that moment, he knew this morning's patrol would be far from a routine walk. This was the beginning of something entirely different. Following the blood trail, a crimson wound slashed across the withering forest, Tao ventured deeper into a region even the younger rangers rarely dared to tread. The sharp wind hissed through broken branches, merging with the slow crunch of his footsteps into a sound that was strangely mournful. The farther he walked, the heavier his heart became, burdened by a growing certainty. He was about to witness something that would not be easy to accept. And then he stopped. Up ahead, in a small clearing between two old acacia trees, was the sight that took his breath away. A fully grown male white lion, the very creature regarded as the spirit of this land, lay on its side, breathing in shallow, labored gasps. The once snowy coat was now matted with mud and brittle leaves. Blood trickled in long lines from a rusted steel trap clamped tightly around its front leg. Its eyes were open but clouded. The pupils trembled each time its body convulsed in pain. Tao stood frozen, his heart clenched inside his chest. This was no stranger. He recognized it instantly, the last white lion he had ever seen, back when it was just a tiny cub, hidden in the tall grass beside its mother's body, shot by a stray bullet. It was he who had first discovered it that winter 12 years ago. Back then, he hadn't thought it would survive the night. But a miracle had occurred. The little lion grew up in the harsh wild, eluding humans, never allowing anyone to come too close. And now, that wild soul lay there broken, helpless right before his eyes. Tao knelt beside it, his trembling hand gently resting on the lion's cold, warm fur. The lion let out a faint hiss, not the mighty roar of the jungle's king, but a choked sound like a cry for help. Four eyes, me-tone pair, clouded from fatigue, the other dimmed by age. Yet in that moment, they recognized each other. "You survived 12 years, only to fall to human greed?" he whispered, tears silently falling. He looked at the steel trap, a cold-blooded device hidden beneath dry leaves, merciless and cruel. It hadn't just wounded the lion's flesh, it was killing the memory, the spirit, the symbol of this land. But Tao would not let that happen. Though his hands were weak and his strength nearly gone, he reached into his backpack, pulling out wire cutters, antiseptic, bandages. Each movement was slow but resolute. Not because he was a ranger, but because he was a witness to a legend, and now he was the last hope to save what was left of the wilderness's miracle. Tao pressed the radio to his lips, his voice rasping from urgency. "Emergency! White lion caught in trap! Request rescue team at coordinates 14.27 south, 28.06 east." But the signal was faint, drowned in the howling wind. In this part of the jungle, radio waves were little more than a fragile prayer to the sky. From the other end, only a muffled, "Received. 5 hours." Then, silence. 5 hours. An eternity for a life bleeding out. He looked back at the lion. Its eyes were now half closed, nose twitching faintly, breaths shallower than before. Every passing minute, blood continued to seep from the metal, slicing through tendon and flesh, soaking the earth below in crimson. He knew, if he didn't act now, the next 5 hours would only count down to a silent death. "No," he murmured, as if commanding himself. "Not while I'm still here." Though his knees ached and his hands trembled, he opened his supply bag and pulled out each item: wire, cutting pliers, leather gloves, antiseptic solution, gauze, a suture needle, and a backup dose of antibiotics. The same hands that had saved hundreds of animals over 4 decades now, prepared for battle once more, this time alone. No teammates, no backup, only a heart that refused to give up. Tao slowly approached the lion, each step light and deliberate. Though exhausted, its wild instincts made it growl softly from time to time. But Tao didn't flinch. He reached out and gently placed his hand on its tangled mane, whispering, "We've met before, remember?" The lion didn't react aggressively, just let out a faint moan, as if in acceptance. He slipped on his gloves and carefully inserted the blade between the coils of steel, strangling the lion's leg. The knife quivered in his grip, partly from tension, partly from age. He had to cut bit by bit, making sure the wires didn't recoil and worsen the wound. Each small metallic clink made his heart leap with worry. More blood flowed as the final wire snapped loose, but at last, the lion's leg was free. He hurriedly rinsed the wound with saline solution. The lion's cry of pain made Tao bite down hard on his lip. He grabbed the needle and thread, his fingers smeared with blood and dirt. The sun was tilting low behind the tree stem, was slipping away too fast. But each stitch he made was a silent declaration. "I will not let you die here." The lion remained still, its eyes now a touch brighter, as if seeing an old friend. A friend risking everything, his life, his faith, to keep it tethered to the living world. In the wild forest, beneath the sunset red as blood, an unspoken battle raged. One man standing alone against time, against death, just to preserve a life thought lost. In the dim, fading light filtering through brittle branches, Tao knelt beside the great, heaving body. His hands, unsteady and strong, now trembled, stained with blood, dust, and sweat. But he didn't stop. 12 years ago, I named your cub Moya," he murmured, slicing the last steel wire with dulled pliers. "That day, he fell into a ravine, crying like a child. I saved him. Maybe you're his father, aren't you?" The white lion didn't react strongly. It only breathed heavily, each exhale lifting a puff of red dust from the parched earth, its clouded gaze fixed on Tao, not fierce, not growling. Just a heavy look, like a soul placing one final trust in the human before it. Tao couldn't explain why he kept whispering, as if stopping even for a moment would sever the fragile thread connecting 2 lives. The blade let out one final screech. The trap snapped open, falling to the earth with a metallic thud, leaving behind a deep black and blue gash on the lion's leg so deep it reached the bone. He swallowed hard, trembling as he gently cradled the injured limb, careful with every breath he took. "You're doing great. Just hold on a little longer," he murmured, lips quivering, voice breaking from exhaustion and emotion. He wiped the blood, sprayed antiseptic on the wound, stitched it slowly, and wrapped it using everything left in his medical pouch. Each time the needle pierced the swollen flesh, the lion's body tensed slightly, but it didn't resist. As if, in that strange moment, nature itself had fallen silent, allowing man and beast to touch without fear. Twilight had arrived. The wind grew colder. Tao, drenched in sweat and blood trickling down his neck, finally paused. He slumped back onto the ground, gasping for breath. In front of him, the white lion was still alive and staring at him with a gaze no words could describe, grateful, in pain, and achingly alive. In that moment, Tao broke into tears. No sound, just silent streams sliding down his wrinkled cheeks. After 40 years in the field, after witnessing life slip away countless times, today a life remained. Not because of a miracle, but because he didn't give up. In silence, deep in the brittle forest, a quiet resurrection unfolded, where trembling human hands lifted a fading legend and pulled it back from the edge of death. Under the withered canopy, where the last rays of sunlight were retreating into dusk, Tao sat quietly beside the great body of the white lion. His hands still trembled, but every motion of bandaging was deliberate, as if he were tending to a wounded child. Each layer of gauze wrapped, each drop of antiseptic applied, was a silent prayer that this fragile life would not leave the world tonight. He rigged a crude IV line from his personal water bottle, attaching it carefully to a vein beneath the thick fur. He knew he wasn't a veterinarian, lacked the proper tools and training, but 4 decades in the wild had taught him how to anchor a life, even by the thinnest thread. The night wind turned sharp, carrying the chorus of insects through the bare, dry branches. Tao pulled his old cloak over his shoulders, closed his eyes, back resting against a tree trunk, his hand still resting gently on the lion's back. A warm touch between man and beast, between the heart of a human and the fading spirit of the wild. He didn't know how long he had drifted off, perhaps an hour, perhaps the entire night. In those broken dreams, he heard distant roars, saw a lion cub circling around him like so many years ago. Then the dream faded into darkness, leaving behind an overwhelming silence. When he opened his eyes, dawn had broken. The first rays of sunlight lit up the trails of dried blood, casting a deep crimson hue onto the earth. He jolted upright. His hand was empty. The space where the lion had lain was bare. No sound, no breath, only large paw prints stamped into the ground and a few drops of dried blood on a nearby rock. He stood motionless, heart tightening. He didn't know whether the lion had managed to stand and leave, or had used its final strength to seek a place to die in peace. He hadn't heard a farewell. He hadn't seen those eyes one last time. Only the early morning breeze brushed through his silver hair, and a hollow ache bled quietly like an invisible wound. "So, you chose to go in silence," he whispered, voice hoarse. No roar answered back. No signs of life remained around him. And yet, deep in his heart, he felt it. The lion had not died alone. In its final hours, it hadn't laid down in solitude. Someone had stayed. Someone had placed a hand upon its back and had cried for a life that nature was taking away. And sometimes, Tao thought, perhaps that was enough. The next morning, he returned to the conservation station, his clothes smeared with mud, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. People asked him anxiously, hoping to hear a miraculous story that he had saved the rare white lion. But he only shook his head faintly, voice low and rough. "Didn't make it. It's gone." No one asked further, because something in his eyes was too heavy, too private. Not long after, he submitted his retirement letter, just as he had planned all along. There was no farewell party, no grand speeches. He quietly packed his things, a few old photographs, some worn notebooks, and a frayed scarf, his late wife's gift from many years ago. He moved back to a small wooden cabin at the forest's edge, the same place he had lived in as a young man. The house was simple, but full of the wind's whispers, birdsong, and the scent of wild grasses he had loved his whole life. In those early days, he woke at dawn, brewed tea, and sat on the porch watching the sun rise through the canopy. His figure seemed to shrink into the vastness of nature, like a piece of the old forest quietly turning into spirit. He was no longer a ranger, no longer had authority, but he still felt the heartbeat of the forest through his own. Then the dreams began, soft as mist, yet haunting in a way he couldn't explain. In those dreams, he stood in vast fields he had never seen before. In front of him stood a white lion, its fur shimmering like moonlight, its eyes clear as crystal. It didn't roar, it only looked at him, then turned and walked away. He followed it through fog-covered ravines, across crystal-clear waterfalls where herds of antelope drank in peace. At times, it would stop atop a high ridge, glance back at him as if asking, "Are you ready?" Then it would walk on. The dreams repeated day after day, and each time he felt younger, lighter, as if the weight of age, regret, and hidden sorrows were being gently washed away. During the day he lived as always, tending to his garden, listening to the animals, jotting down weather patterns as an old habit. But every night, when he lay down, he knew he would see it again. No one at the station knew what he dreamt of. No one truly knew what had happened that day in the forest, and he had no intention of telling. Because some things can only be understood between nature and those who truly belong to it. Because sometimes the gift of redemption doesn't come in the form of an embrace, but in a dream that no one else in the world will ever have again. One early winter morning, before the sun had even risen, Tao awoke to the sound of an unfamiliar bird singing by the porch. He put on his coat, opened the door, and froze. Right in front of Hemat, the center of the dry, cracked earth that had been scorched through the dry season, stood a tiny white flower, its stem as delicate as thread, its petals fragile as morning dew. His hands trembled as he bent down to touch it, afraid to pick it, afraid to breathe too hard. Because he recognized it, the snow-white Than-Tuyet blossom, a species that had been declared extinct in that region for over 20 years. In his youth, he had once followed his Mathera healer, who used herbs searching for this flower through countless rainy seasons, never to find it. And now it bloomed in front of the wooden cabin of an old Mantha, one who had once saved a life deep in the forest. Something gentle and sacred stirred in his chest, making him sit down on the steps, letting the tears slip silently down the folds of his wrinkled cheeks. 3 days later, while boiling water for tea, he saw a shadow appear quietly atop the distant hill. Through the thinning veil of mist, a white lion stood tall, the sunlight glowing against its fur, making it shine with a mystical aura like a spirit from legend. It didn't roar, it didn't move. It simply stood, gazing in his direction. Though he couldn't see the face clearly, he knew it was him, the lion he once called the last son of the old forest. He stood up, silently placing his hand over his chest. No words were spoken, but in that moment, two soulsons thought to have parted forever quietly met again. A week later, conservationists discovered something extraordinary captured by a forest camera. At night, when the reserve's border areas were often prowled by hyenas, wild dogs, or leopards, a white lion appeared consistently. It walked along the fence line, warding off predators, keeping the protected zone untouched. No documented behavior like this had ever been recorded. A fully grown lion patrolling in silence, like a night watchman guarding nature. They brought the footage to show Mr. Tao. When the image of the lion appeared, walking under the moonlight, he simply smiled a warm smile, not of surprise. "It wasn't me who saved him," he whispered. "We saved each other. What the forest returned wasn't life, it was continuity." He looked up toward the green canopy. Somewhere, among the layered leaves, a white gaze was watching. And the flower by the porch still bloomed as proof that love, even silent love, could spark life even in things long thought dead. 1 year after the first white flower had bloomed again on that parched land, Mr. Tao passed away peacefully in his sleep-on, the old wooden bed inside his small cabin at the forest's edge. Above his bed still hung the pencil drawing he had made, a white lion standing in the sunset, with eyes gentle enough to speak. A neighbor found him lying on his side, hand resting over his heart, as if cradling something sacred. No pain, no final words. He left this world the same way he had lived, quietly, kindly, and in harmony with the breath of nature. On the day of his burial there was no rain, but the forest wind blew hard, carrying dry petals down into the earth. Everyone from the reserve came, bringing wildflowers, blades of grass, and small stones, things he had cherished far more than any title or medal. There was no ornate headstone, just a small wooden plaque, hand-carved with the words, "Tao, the Last Guardian." But then, something strange began to happen. At dawn the next morning, fresh lion tracks appeared in the soil before his grave, clearly pressed into the morning dew. No one saw it come, no one saw it leave. Yet, every sunrise, the tracks returned, leading from the forest's edge to his resting place, disappearing just as the sunlight touched the treetops. The local villagers weren't surprised. They said it was the spirit of the white lion, Mr. Tao's final friend. It did not roar, did not demand anything, only came in silence, like a quiet gesture of gratitude. Since then, the story of the man who saved the last king of the wild has been passed down by campfires, in lullabies told by grandmothers to their grandchildren, and in the eyes of young rangers just arriving at the reserve. They speak of Mr. Tao as a legend, not because he was grand, but because he knew how to love without condition. The forest remains green, the grass still grows, and the white flower from that day has now spread into a small cluster before the doorstep of his old cabin. Every year, as the seasons change, some say they see a white lion sitting silently on the hill, gazing toward the place where he once lived. No statues were erected, no books were written in his honor, but the heart of the forest has etched his name into the wind, the leaves, and the quiet paw prints of a sovereign creature. And if one day you find yourself in that land at dawn, walk gently, for you just might see a living monument of legend watching over the sleep of the forest's quietest hero. Thank you for listening to this deeply emotional story. If your heart stirred at the bond between a man and a lion, if you believe that kindness can cross the boundaries between species, leave a like to show your support for the wild. Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more stories full of humanity and the quiet miracles shared between people and the wilderness, where every heartbeat is tied to a life. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe that one small act can spark an unimaginable miracle? And if this story touched you, share the video with a friend. Let's spread the love for nature together.